You're listening to a Big Heads Media podcast.
Tonight, the Amityville story goes from true crime to the paranormal, from the DeFeos to the Lutzes. It's Amityville Part Two. All that and more on Small Town Secrets.
Every town has a secret. What is yours?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 10 of season 3, which also means it's the final episode of the season, which also means we are we are chugging along with part 2 of our season 3 finale, which is, of course, Amityville, New York. I don't even know why I told you that. I just told you that in the intro. Here's a double intro. But we have a lot to get to tonight. This is going to be, I don't know if it'll be a massive episode. I always kind of say that just by judging by the notes, and then sometimes it's not any bigger than it normally is. It just depends on how much I have to talk about and how fast I go. But really incredible stuff coming up in this episode. We're going to go through the story of the Lutzes, almost with a fine-tooth comb, but not so fine-tooth that I have to talk about it for like 3 hours. But fine-tooth enough. And then we've got some news stories, which came together really quickly. I think I found all 3 of them in like the span of 2 minutes, maybe. And they all talk about finding things. They're all kind of like, but just artifacts that people have uncovered over the past couple of weeks. And then we're going to talk more about Amityville in the Your Small Town Secrets section as we talk to Jason Cowan, who knew George Lutz later in George's life, and have a pretty amazing half an hour or so long conversation with him that if you've ever looked into the Amityville story or have gotten down its rabbit hole, there might be a lot of things in that interview that you did not know before. And we get into a couple of other things like some personal experiences and all of that. It's a great interview. It's probably one of the most fun, most informative ones that I've ever done for this show. And it was a blast, and I'm glad it's going to be on here. And then we're going to be done with season 3 and episode 10 of season 3 and the season, and be gearing up for the return of season 4. I'll talk about season 4 a little bit here when everything is wrapped up and finished. So we're going to go ahead, before we get into the meat of the show, we're going to listen to a couple of promos. One from Big Heads Media Podcast, Forrest Rambe, and the other one from Fireside Phantoms. So take a listen, and I will be back in just a little bit like I always am.
Hello, I'm Rich Ferraro. I host the Forest Ramble, the intelligent Nottingham Forest podcast. Every month I'm joined by Stephen Topless.
Hello.
And the Maradon in the Midlands.
Hello.
To review and discuss what's been happening at the City Ground.
We provide match reports, sharing our thoughts on what we have seen.
And our contributors Baz.
Hello.
And Jeremy.
Hello.
Chip in with analysis and nostalgia.
Subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts, search for Forest Ramble on social media, or visit www.forestramble.com.
Hi, I'm Carol.
And I'm Holly, and we are the hosts of Fireside Phantoms.
On our podcast, we will delight in telling you stories of the strange, twisted, dark, and foreboding.
Creepy, crawly things slinking up your leg.
Ghostly hands reaching out from beyond the grave.
And we will ask hard-hitting questions like,
can Slender Man fit into my skinny jeans?
Who is Wrinkles the Clown, and how can he make your child's next birthday party special?
Why shouldn't we invite the black-eyed kids in?
What really is going on at your creepy neighbor's house? And is it okay to peek inside?
And many, many more.
So join us and our forest friends
as we gather around a warm and crackling campfire. This is Fireside Phantoms.
All right, all that is done and out of the way, and we're going to move on with tonight's episode as we talk about Amityville some more and the story of the Lutz family haunting. So this is where it gets really crazy. So before I get into this, I feel I have to preference a couple of things. I reiterate this in the interview with Jason as well. This story is what I would describe as a quagmire. I can't even remember. I might touch this a little bit in the last episode, but it's really hard, nay I say it impossible, to find a book or a documentary or an episode of a TV show that is kind of a nice gray area that just says, here's the story as we know it, make up your mind. Which is what I'm attempting to do tonight, as best as I can. Also, my discount Staples chair is starting to creak, so I apologize. I might have to break out some WD-40 or something and lube it up. But that's the way it is. Like, you can't watch a documentary or read a book without a bunch of people saying, no, this is wrong. You know, there's too many voices, too many hands in the soup, as we say in the interview coming up, that to make this just like a nice neutral kind of story to talk about. It's very decisive. But so what I'm going to do with this episode is I'm going to talk about the story as best we know it from what it was when it came out. Obviously, like it happened in 75 into 76. So we're talking like 45 years of this story being around and just stuff being piled on top of it. So what I decided to do, even though it's, a lot of people will tell you no, is I read the Jay Anson book, The Amityville Horror, because it's the best, I think, timeline that we have closest to when everything happened. And yes, I'm sure there are many things in that book that were exaggerated by Anson. So just keep that in mind when I go through this, because I'm literally just going to go through a timeline, the best that we know it, of things that book says happened to the family. An approximate timeline. That's the way the book is actually divided up. It's divided up by, the chapters are like days, every day. And I was like, there's no way they knew, they had that good of a memory where they could have kept that. So I'm sure those are just like approximate dates, going back through the story and being like, oh, well, it happened after this, so it must have happened on this day. So just kind of using the days as best we know them as a divider, just like the book did, I'm going to go through and just hit some of the more famous points and maybe some of the more interesting points that you didn't see in the movies and all that. I actually rewatched the original movie last night. What is it, night? Thursday? Yeah. So it's not Thursday anymore. Now it's Friday morning. But I used to have that movie on DVD, and I watched it all the time. And it's the same old story. I I lent the DVD to someone to watch it, and I haven't seen it since. So Vanessa, if you're listening, I want my DVD back from like 13 years ago. Actually, I bought it on iTunes, so don't bother. But like, I went back and watched it. And I used to watch this movie all the time, and I watched it. I'm like, I don't remember any of this stuff. Like, if anyone's ever seen it, like all the stuff with the priest and all that. Like, I remember him being in it, but I don't remember him being such a recurring character, you know? And I'm like, I don't remember any of this stuff. Almost to the point where it was like, did I have some weird cut of the movie where they just cut all the priest scenes, all the Catholic scenes, like, out of it? Or I just probably don't remember any of that stuff. Like, I don't remember the mayor from Jaws being in there, or any of that stuff. Or the guy that played Bennings in The Thing is in that movie for like 10 seconds, which made me smile. But, you know, there's a lot of that movie does touch on some stuff, and it's always been an okay movie in my opinion. Like I used to watch it pretty regularly, and I've not seen it in like 13 years, but I just wanted to watch it to kind of refresh myself about what it says versus what's in the book versus what other people have said. And then I used another book called Possessed, the Amityville Enigma, which kind of goes into something we'll talk about later, but it was a good book in the sense that it gave some really nice early history on the house and on the surrounding area, some old newspaper articles, which we'll get into very soon, and stuff like that. It's a quick read. Like, it's a 102-page book or a 106-page book, but at like page 72, it's just pictures of the house. Just pictures of the house. And not like creepy crime scene photos of the house or, you know, houses from the investigation. Just pictures of the house as it appeared normally. Which I was like, you know, it was actually kind of interesting just to see the layout of the house. And it gives you a really good idea of what the house looked like at the time. I will warn you, some of the images contain the most graphic 70s wallpaper I have ever seen. So just, you know, watch out for that. But it's in the show notes. Both of them, the Jay Anson book and those are in the show notes. So I guess I told you all of that to tell you this. I am attempting to tell the story as close as it was to the time that it happened. And I think the best way to kind of do that is to just go through the Amityville Horror book and a couple of other resources that helped me get a little close to it. And just realize that there might be some grains of salt that perhaps you should take. So with all that out of the way, let's talk about the Lutz haunting at 112 Ocean Avenue. The story of the Amityville house did not stop with the DeFeos. In December of 1975, the Lutz family moved into their dream home. Not only was it their dream home, but they got much of the DeFeo's belongings, and they got it all at a steal. 28 days later, the family would flee in terror from the house and never return to it. This is where the story goes from true crime to the paranormal. The house, that was once at 112 Ocean Avenue, was built over an existing foundation in 1927 by the Moynihan family. Before that, the property has some interesting history. A New York Times article from sometime in the late 1800s reports a story of dead babies being found in the Amityville Creek. A woman with the last name of Ireland was later arrested for perverting nature, quote unquote. One of those old-timey law names. Why is this interesting? Because it was a woman by the name of Annie Ireland who owned and later sold the property to the Moynahans in the 20s. There does not seem to be any concrete evidence that Annie is indeed the woman caught for disposing of illegal abortions in the waters around Amityville, but it does make one think. And there's a couple, like I said, these are the articles I was talking about a couple minutes ago. I attempted to sign up for newspapers.com and get not a subscription, like a membership, so I could maybe try to find these old articles, but their site has been acting a little wonky. I think I'm signed into it now, but I didn't get a chance to sit down and maybe search to see if I could find them. I do have a couple that are reprinted in the Possession Amityville Enigma book. That's not the only news article from around the time about strange happenings in Amityville. The article in question is entitled "There's a Haunted House," and I was going to read the article, but on air, if you will. But there's only a scan in the book, and it's kind of hard to read. But I was able to kind of fumble through, but I'm not going to attempt to fumble through it again. It basically talks about a house. It doesn't name the address or say that it's 100% 112, but it does say it is a valuable property that's on the lake, half a mile from shore. I love it. Sometimes it's a lake, sometimes it's a canal, sometimes it's a creek. And on the other side of that lake, there was a hermit who lived in a hut for like 27 years. And they don't really get into what haunted it, but I think the article posits that like he was a hermit because he used to be a soldier and his wife died, and that made him decide to go live in this hut. And then he shot himself, and that was just weird because most people around the area don't shoot themselves; they die of old age. But that's basically what they get into. They never like come out and say, "Oh, it's haunted by the ghost of this old hermit." They just kind of let you make that decision. There has also been some debate to the idea that the house was built on an old Native American burial ground. This was concluded by famed ghost hunter Hans Holzer. Although this has never been 100% confirmed, there is yet another news article from the Brooklyn Daily Eagle dated March 30th of 1895, and the article is titled "Indian Relics Found at Amityville." And this one I can read because the book transcribed it all. Amityville, Long Island, March 30th. Workmen engaged in digging a cellar for a new house to be erected on the property of E.W. Burdett on Ocean Avenue in the village have discovered several skeletons, some of them in good state of preservation. They are believed to be the remains of Indians of the Iroquois tribe, who, long ago, had a burying ground in the vicinity. On the same property, which up to a few years ago was only an immense mound of clam and oyster shells, trees have been found and are believed to have been set out by the same tribe. They are peculiar in their growth, foliage, and the nature of the wood, the species of which no one in this locality can identify. The Iroquois owned vast tracts of land in this vicinity, and at Woodsboro, on the far Rockaway branch of the Long Island Railroad, is a monument erected to one of the chiefs of the Iroquois on the land formerly owned by him. The stone commemorates a lifelong friendship between Kululo and Abraham Hewlett, the purchaser of the ground on which the Indian lived. Demonologist Ed Warren has said in TV interviews that where the boathouse now stands, there was once a building where Native American prisoners were kept and possibly tortured and just kind of left to die. Even though neither of these claims can be confirmed, they are not unheard of. It must be noted that probably many burial sites have not been discovered or documented, as well as the treatment of Native Americans, especially in the 1800s. It's just more food for esoteric thought. Whatever its origins and the secret it holds, the property is real, and on December 18th, 1975, newlyweds George and Kathy Lutz moved into the house at 112 Ocean Avenue. They had purchased the house and some of the DeFeo's possessions, like I think some of their washers and dryers, some of their air conditioners, like all the furniture was kind of in there. And they just, George paid a little extra and just got all the stuff that the DeFeos had left behind, including their beds, for around $80,000. The new couple, along with Kathy's 3 children, Daniel 9, Chris 7, and Missy 5, made the move from Deer Park, New York. The price was considerably less than the other houses in the upscale part of Amityville, around $50,000 to $60,000 cheaper. George was the owner of a land surveying company called William H. Perry Incorporated, so he knew a good deal when he saw one. The last time the house sold was in 2019 for $650,000, just to give you a little idea of how much stuff is in Amityville now. The family had found quite the steal. It was only after Kathy fell head over heels for the house that the realtor disclosed the details of the DeFeo massacre. This didn't seem to deter the Lutzes from buying the home. The next day, Kathy had a priest she knew stop by to bless the new house. This man's name was Father James Pecoraro. As he was blessing the home, he made his way upstairs to what was now the Lutz's sewing room, but had been the bedroom of Mark and John DeFeo. As the priest blessed the room, he suddenly felt the temperature drop in the room. Even though it was winter, he found it odd for the room to suddenly get so cold. As he continued, Pecoraro heard a deep, timbered voice yell at him from behind to get out, it bellowed. The priest then claimed that he was slapped across the face by an unseen force. Later that day, Father Pecoraro was visiting his mother. On his way back to the rectory, his car hood suddenly flew up and smashed into the windshield. Then his right door flew open as well. After that, the car stalled. He called the rectory and with the help of another priest, got his car to his shop, but was not able to start. And that was just day one. So a little bit about Father Pecoraro. His name wasn't known for the first couple years. He wanted to remain anonymous. And over the years, he kind of backed away from the story a little bit. He's no longer with us. But I think I found just one of those stray little news interviews that you kind of read and you don't really, like, no, there's not enough here for me to really use this for the show. And I heard that he claimed that he only called the family one time. And that he didn't really know them. But I don't know if I believe that, because there's a picture in the Amityville Enigma book that is reported to be Father Pecoraro with Kathy's kids before they even bought the house. So I'm pretty sure he knew him, and I don't know if he just didn't want the attention, if the church didn't want him to get the attention, or what was going on, but a lot of stuff with Father Pecoraro has gone back and forth, so I won't touch on him a lot I'm not even sure about the whole car incident thing. So I'm just going to kind of leave him there. I will mention him a couple of times, but I won't get too heavily into him, just because you can't really corroborate a lot of what was going on. Over the next 27 days, the odd and frightening events would go on almost relentlessly. I have developed a timeline of events based off the approximate days in the J. Anson book, The Amityville Horror. So I'm just going to go through them. This is just a list of the day, the approximate day they think stuff happened, and what happened, and then we'll get to we'll go from there. December 19th. George awoke on the first night in the house at 3:15 a.m. And this is something I want to talk about. I guess he did look into it, the police report and stuff, and they surmised that the murders happened at around 3:15 a.m. So there was a time of death. I know in the last episode I was kind of like, oh, they didn't really care about a lot of that because it was such a cut and dry case. And I mentioned that maybe Ronnie got away with it because he, did it during the day or something and waited to, unveil the bodies, the murders. But it still, I guess, kind of could have worked. He might have been able to have just kind of held everyone captive in the house throughout the day, and then at 3:15 a.m. Go back and shoot everyone if he was able to do it by himself. But that was kind of a mistake on my part. 3:15 a.m. and I knew that, and I guess I just used the wrong terminology. I just kind of had a brain fart. So if you're going back and listening to that first part of this and that doesn't really make a lot of sense, that's my fault, and I apologize. There was a knock at his front door that woke him up. He walked into the sewing room, which overlooked the backyard as well as the boathouse. He noticed the family dog Harry was nowhere to be seen. What George did notice was a shadow in the darkness. He thought someone was out there. George opened the window and shouted at the intruder. Harry the dog also emerged from the darkness, but could not do much since he was tied up on a lead. Mr. Lutz had no choice but to put on some clothes, go out in the cold, and flush this person out himself. However, when he got outside, he found no one, just Harry, who kept frantically barking. George also discovered the boathouse door was now unlocked and swinging open in the December wind. The boat was new and one of George's most prized possessions, so he was sure he had locked the boathouse before he went to bed. He locked the boathouse again and tried to go back to sleep. December 20 to the 21st. Every member of the family had started to act a little differently. The changes were small but noticeable, mostly some noted irritability. It was George, however, that was hit the hardest. To him, the children seemed to have become more belligerent. In one of those early days in the house, both Kathy and him had become so enraged that the children had broken a window in the playroom that they were hit with a leather strap and a wooden spoon. George also was finding it harder and harder to keep warm and started constantly throwing log after log onto the fire. Even though the thermostat read 75 degrees, he just couldn't get warm. December 22nd. This would be the day that Kathy would start to feel touched by something not there, and also smell perfume when the sensation was happening. The odd sensation started off friendly, at first almost as a caress, but as time went on it became more aggressive. She would often feel this happen in the kitchen, which is where she was on December 22nd, as the kids ran up to her telling her to come upstairs. In one of the upstairs bathrooms, the toilet was filled with a black substance which smelled of decay. They would soon discover the black goo was in the other upstairs bathroom as well. In order to deter the smell, George and Kathy went around opening the windows. Kathy went into the sewing room to open the window, only to find the room filled with flies. They weren't sure how they got there since it was the middle of winter. After that, the flies would intermittently show up in that room for no reason at all. Later that night, George once again woke up at 3:15. He wandered downstairs, only to find the front door torn from its hinges. December 24th, Christmas Eve. On Christmas Eve, Father Pecoraro called the Lutzes, even though he seemed to be coming down with quite the flu. He called the house and talked to George for a while. The conversation turned to the sewing room. The priest gave George a bit of advice. He told George and his family to stay out of that room. After that, the phone began to crackle and distort. This would happen every time the family tried to get in touch with Father Pecoraro, or vice versa. Furthermore, the priest would grow sick anytime he tried to get in touch with them, coming down with the flu several times. He would also develop painful blisters on his hands at one point. December 25th, Christmas. Once again at 3:15, George Lutz awoke and went out to check the boathouse. While outside, he turned and looked up at the house. He could see Missy looking out of her second-floor bedroom window. Behind her was what appeared to be a pig with glowing red eyes. This pig, according to Missy, was called Jody, and would at times appear to her as an angel and a little boy. December 27th. It was on the 27th that Kathy discovered the red room. The finished basement had a few closets. Kathy was using one of these as extra pantry space to store canned goods and such. While putting away groceries, she bumped into another shelf, and to her surprise, it moved. It was a secret door. Behind the door was not much more than a small storage space. George thought it may have been a bomb shelter, and many have speculated that it may have been part of the original house. There would be times that this room would give off bad smells, and Harry the dog would not go near it. And I found a little itty-bitty YouTube video, it's only a couple minutes long, I linked it in the show notes, of someone showing us the red room, the actual red room, because there's not a lot of color pictures of it. There's some black and white pictures that you can find, but I don't know, it's just like it's 2 minutes long, and she just goes in there and she goes, here's the red room, and she opens up the little secret door and sits in it. And it is indeed painted red, but it looks like they tried to scrape off a bunch of the paint. I don't know when it was taken. It looked like it was probably taken sometime in maybe the late 80s or early 90s. But it's an interesting, if you actually want to see what that room looked like in color, it's a couple minutes and it's definitely worth the watch. December 28th. One Christmas, Kathy had gotten George a large, ornate ceramic lion. It was on this day that Kathy noticed the lion had moved several inches from where it had been sitting since they moved in. Later in the day, George tripped over the lion as it made its way into the middle of the living room. The next day, he had cuts on his ankle in the shape of teeth marks. After another incident with the lion moving, they threw it out, only for it to end up back in the house. and no one knows how. The kids said they never did it. January 1st. It was 1 minute after midnight on the new year. After the kids had gone to bed, Kathy had become hypnotized in the fireplace, which often happens when you gaze into flames. She gasped in horror as she saw what was described as a demon with a white peaked hood manifest in the fire. George saw it as well. Later that night, when Kathy and George were in bed, they were suddenly awoke by a raging wind. All the windows in the room were open and the sheets had been blown off the bed. Going out into the hallway, they found all the windows and doors open, all but the door to Missy's room. The house was now frigid due to the open windows and doors, but when George opened Missy's door, he found the room to be hot. Not warm, but very hot. He also noticed Missy's rocking chair rocking back and forth on its own. Missy, however, was sound asleep. Later that evening, around 10 p.m., both George and Kathy saw the beady, red glowing eyes of an enormous pig outside the living room window. The next morning, George found fresh tracks in the snow of hoofprints. Hoofprints of a pig, not of a demon. A pig. Still creepy, but a pig. January 4th. On the night of the 4th, George heard what could only be described as a marching band playing and parading through the house. It only got louder as he went downstairs. He could hear it plain as day, but saw nothing. When he returned to the bedroom, he observed Kathy levitating 2 feet above the bed. She had been asleep the whole time and wasn't even aware that it was happening. January 6th. On the night of the 6th, George got a sudden craving for a beer and decided to go to Henry's bar. This was the same bar that Ronnie DeFeo had stormed into the night he murdered his family. George had gone into the bar before and had been told just how much he himself looked like Ronnie. Kathy was asleep, and when George went to shake her awake, he once again saw her levitating above the bed. He pulled her towards him and got her back down on the bed and woke her up. He discovered her face was ingrained with deep lines and wrinkles. Kathy would also later suffer from strange welts that would burn. Both times, these strange ailments lasted for about a day and then just disappeared, as mysteriously as they had come. January 8th. This is the day the famous green slime was seen. The children were up on the 3rd floor. Kathy went to check on them and gave out a scream. The scream made George race up the stairs to investigate. In the 3rd floor playroom, there was a green jello-like substance oozing out of the cracks and down the walls. George actually tasted it and said even though it looked like jello, it had no taste whatsoever. There would be occasions after this where the green slime could be seen coming out of keyholes in the doors. January 10th. On the day of the 10th, it started to storm hard. As the icy storm raged outside, Kathy suddenly remembered that she had left the windows open in their bedroom, just a crack, to let the room air out. She asked Danny to run upstairs and close them, which he did. However, a painful scream came from the upstairs seconds later. One of the windows had come down straight on his hands. But the window came down with so much force that it flattened his fingers. Even with George pulling with all his might, the window would not budge until it seemed to just let go by itself. Upon taking Danny to the hospital, they found he had no broken bones. January 14th, the final day. The family had made up its mind that it was time to leave the house. They gathered up Harry and hopped into the van that the Lutzes owned. Even though the van had plenty of gas, it would not start. George got out and popped the hood. It was at this moment that another huge storm immediately pounded down on them. With no running car, the family reluctantly fled back into the house. The phones by this point were not working, which means they couldn't call anyone. It was as if the house had them trapped there. As the family stayed inside, the temperature began to fall until there was no real heat in the house. Almost as if like the power went off and the heat wasn't working and the temperature just dropped. Later in the day, the storm and the coldness relented and the house started to warm up again. This welcome sensation did not last long. The boys ran into their parents' bedroom, scared out of their minds. They said that a faceless monster was in their room and had tried to grab them. Moments later, Harry started barking madly at something on the 3rd floor stairs. When George went to get him, he saw what the dog was barking at. It was the figure clad in white, the same one from the fireplace. This was the straw that broke the camel's back. With two entities now showing themselves, the family, including the dog, ran back out the front door and back into the van. This time, the van started with no trouble, and George wasted no time in leaving 112 Ocean Avenue. The Lutz family never returned for any of their belongings. The house, their possession, George's boat, were all sold at auction. George even ended up selling off his share of the business. Soon after, the family moved to California. However, this would not be the end of the Lutz story. Not by a long shot. So, after the boom here, we're going to come back and talk about what happened after the haunting. The investigation by the Warrens and all that great stuff. So, I'm going to take a little break, which you're not even going to know about because it's not going to be, in the show. I'm going to edit it out. And then we'll come back and we'll finish up the story. So hold on for just a couple of seconds and I'll be right back with it. And we're back. And let's move on with this story. We're getting there. We're getting to the what do you want to say? What's the word? It just went away. It's gone. The home stretch. Not a word, a phrase. The home stretch of this story. On March 6, 1976, an anchorman from Channel 5 News named Marvin Scott, along with Ed and Lorian Warren, proceeded to do an investigation of 112 Ocean Avenue. The investigation yielded some interesting finds. Originally, George Lutz was going to be present for the investigation, but at the last moment decided to just meet the team at a nearby pizza parlor and give them the keys. The Amityville investigation team consisted of Ed and Lorian Warren, Marvin Scott, Carlos Osis, the president of the American Society for Psychical Research, Alex Tanis, Dr. Brian Riley, a parapsychologist, as well as his wife Alberta, Mary Downey, a psychic, two cameramen who both had shot in combat conditions, and a few people from Duke University. During the investigation, some interesting things did happen. When they first arrived, Ed went down into the basement. He often did this first on investigations, like this was his kind of go-to play, because he always said that the basement was, if there's anything dark in the house, the basement is where it's going to be. In the basement, he said he felt great changes in pressure, as well as a series of electrical shocks. Meanwhile, Lorraine went upstairs, and also felt odd changes in pressure. Both of the cameramen had heart palpitations. Lorraine has said in interviews that all the men that were there that night had some sort of heart problem. Even Ed had a heart attack sometime after the investigation. During the first of 3 seances held that night, many of the participants grew ill and had to leave the room. Mary Downey felt personally threatened by a presence in the house. Mrs. Riley felt that there was a presence of something upstairs, and this is also where Lorraine kind of proclaimed that this was one of the most haunted places, most energy-filled places they had ever been. Then, of course, there's the Ghost Boy photograph. George Lutz unveiled this photograph on the Merv Griffin show before the movie was about to come out. The picture was taken by an infrared static camera on the 2nd floor. The photo depicts what appears to be a child peeking out of one of the bedrooms. Many have claimed that this is one of the younger DeFeo boys, or even Jody himself. Others have said that it's just someone's kid who was there that night. Even though, it's pretty easy to debunk that. There weren't any kids there that night. It wouldn't even have made sense. It wasn't like, we couldn't get a babysitter, I gotta take my kid to the haunted house. Nah, I don't think that happened. One possible explanation is that this is actually a man named Paul Bartz, who was there that night. The boys' glowing eyes are nothing but a glare due to the infrared film, and their shirts kinda match. However, the shirts don't match 100% completely, and I don't believe that Bartz has ever come forward about it. So this is kind of a pretty reasonable explanation. He was there that night. There's pictures of him. You can contrast and compare if you just kind of do a Google search. And It might have been like him kind of crouched down in a doorway, but I don't understand, like, if it was him, I feel like it would have been really easy for him to go, yeah, that was me, or yeah, that wasn't me, and I haven't been able to find anything of him ever coming forward saying yay or nay on the subject. And I did kind of look at both the pictures. The shirts aren't quite the same. Like, they're both plaid shirts. These are not color photos either. And like, the lines seem thicker on one shirt and thinner on the other shirt. It'd be great if we had, like, color photos so that we could see exactly what the colors of the shirt were. But it is a creepy picture nonetheless, and it will be in the show notes, and you can take a look at it and see for yourself. Since the Lutz family left the home, there has been little activity reported about the house. I'm not saying there hasn't been any, I'm just saying no one's talked about it. It eventually changed owners a couple of times, and the address has changed, and the infamous eye windows have been removed. The Red Room has also been torn out when the basement underwent remodeling. The reports of non-activity by future homeowners, along with some bad publicity, has led many to claim that it's nothing but a hoax, perpetrated by the Lutz family to make money. And if that's true, they didn't really make that much. All in all, they made $260,000 off the movie and book, while Jay Anson, the author of the Amityville Horror, made millions. Both Kathy and George took lie detector tests as a stipulation to have the movie released. Like, it was, I guess it was going to kind of be, I don't want to say like a publicity thing, but it probably was. They were both going to get lie detector tests, and they were supposed to come out on the Merv Griffin show. They didn't. They were printed later in a magazine or a tabloid. They were given polygraph tests by the two leading technicians in the country at the time. George was given his test by Chris Gogez, and Kathy was given hers by Michael Rice. Both passed their test. And I have linked in the show notes a interview with Ed and Lorian Warren, which is very interesting to watch. And at the end of that, Lorraine has the host get out the polygraph test results, and he reads through some of the questions and gets into it and just says, everything they seem to have said was truthful. Of course, there have been many ideas put forth as to what caused the activity in the house, such as negative energy from Native American spirits, negative energy from the Red Room itself, and I've always been kind of confused on this, but I think someone found evidence of a well that was also on the property, and I'm not sure if the Red Room was covering that up or what. I think that was supposed to be the idea, and it was said that if they were able to cover up this well, then the activity might stop. But I couldn't find anything super concrete on that, so I didn't get into it that much. Did something manifest because of what happened to the DeFeos? Was the house haunted by the murdered family? Is it possible that the house was never haunted at all, and maybe it was the leftover possessions of the DeFeo family? And that is something I thought about a lot for a long time, was that maybe the reason no one has ever reported any real activity since then is because it was never really the house that was haunted. Maybe it was this burst of negative energy coupled with some other things to create this kind of cauldron of activity, and it was not the house, it was the possessions left over, and it just kind of soaked itself into these possessions. So that could kind of explain why, once all that was sold off and taken away from the house, everything kind of died down. But there is kind of another possibility, and that is the possible dabblings of the occult brought something out of the house. Chris Lutz, who now goes by Chris Quarantino, has maintained that George dabbled in the occult. Perhaps there is some evidence to support this. In Stephen Kaplan's book, The Amityville Conspiracy, he quotes George as saying he knew a man named Ray Buckland. Sure, I knew Ray. We had some interesting conversations about witchcraft, and he ran a museum. Ray Buckland moved to New York from London. He did have a keen interest in the occult, and he did open a museum for witchcraft and magic in New York, later moving it to New Hampshire when it grew too large. Now, it must be noted that Kaplan was the first parapsychologist the Lutzes hired to investigate the house, but bad blood quickly started to flow between the two, between the couple and Kaplan, after Kaplan told the press about his investigation, which is something the Lutzes did not want. And then he also came back and said, I'm not a parapsychologist, I'm a vampirologist, and they just didn't have a lot of faith in him. And it seems that since then, Kaplan had a grudge against the couple and kind of tried to smear them at every turn. So I guess what I'm getting at is, let's say, and we talk about this in the upcoming interview, like, it was the 70s. A lot of these things are coming back into vogue. These alternative practices. Yoga was coming back, and, transcendental meditation and chaos magic, and all of these things were kind of in vogue at the time. So, I don't think that if Lutz did dabble in the occult, I don't think he was some sort of evil magician. As I say, I think I even reinstated that in the interview. But he might have had an interest, and that in itself is not bad. But if you think about it, because I have an interest in the occult, and it's no big deal, but back in the late 70s, early 80s, with the satanic panic just starting to kind of blossom and arrive, if you started saying that someone was into the occult, then that probably just went way, way far to ruin their credibility. But to me, and even to Jason when we talk about him, it's entirely possible that maybe George dabbled a little bit into something that he didn't quite understand and brought it into the house, and that might have stirred some stuff up. But no matter what you think about the story, both Kathy and George maintain their story about what they experienced up until their deaths. Kathy died in 2004 and George in 2006. Daniel, Chris, and Missy, their 3 children, carry on as well as George's daughters from another marriage after he and Kathy got divorced. Their names are Gabrielle and Noelle, and the only reason I mention their names is Jason brings them up in the interview, so I want everyone to be aware of these 2 other people that I haven't talked about thus far. And really, there we go. That is the story from beginning to the end, as kind of accurately as I think I can tell it, hopefully, of the Amityville horror, the house at 112 Ocean Avenue, which brings us to the middle of the show. Well, maybe not yeah. And we're going to why do I keep saying we? That is a season 4 resolution to quit saying we. There's no one else here. The cat doesn't count. I will be playing some music here for the intermission. I think we're going to go with Something Wicked is the name of this track. When I come back, we'll do the local headlines. And like I said earlier in the show, all of the local headlines do share a common theme. They are all kind of old artifacts that have been discovered over the last couple of weeks. The first one has been making the rounds. I've seen it pop up in a couple of places. And this is fishermen baffled over puzzling 60 mystery cubes with bizarre inscriptions from a UK river. This comes from the express.co.uk. It is written by Mill McLaughlin. The cubes were found by Will Reed, 38, while he was scouring the area for precious metals with his son. Mr. Reed from Finham in South Coventry revealed the objects on his Facebook page as he tried to gain any valuable information about the mysterious objects. The objects are believed to be linked to a Hindu prayer ritual which Mr. Reed discovered while sifting through the River Stowe on May 8th. After taking a closer look at the cubes, Mr. Reed and his sons Jackson 5... oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to leave this in just because it says Jackson 5 like his age, but I read it real quick and I said Jackson 5 like the music group. And Benjamin 7 noticed neat inscriptions were engraved in grids on either side. Mr. Reed said on Facebook, "We were out magnet fishing as our daily activity in the lockdown, and we were in a relatively isolated spot. At first we found keys and pennies and other bits of bobs, and we looked down and saw what we thought were tiles. I was live streaming to friends on Facebook, and I bent down and started picking them up." There are some really cool pictures on this article of the cubes. They've got them kind of all stacked up in a wall and just some close-up pictures. Really neat looking. "I also thought they might be rocks. I showed them to the camera, and as I looked back, more and more kept appearing. They were all sorts of stories flying around at first. The cubes really captured people's imaginations. What I learned is that they were of Indian origin, and they show inscriptions for prayers which take effect when they are thrown into the river. After posting the images on social media, Mr. Reed believed the inscriptions are in Sanskrit. Sanskrit is the ritual language related to Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. The cubes also show the mythical diagrams which are used for worship. These diagrams are termed as yantra." And once again, there's some more pictures. "Despite the speculation on social media, no date has been placed on the cubes. It is also not known why so many were thrown into the river. Mr. Reed has now returned to the spot where he found the cubes and has since found a silver coin," which is also in a picture, I believe. I thought they were using it for scale, but now that I'm reading through the article, I think that was the coin. Mr. Reed added, "The more I learn, the stranger it becomes. No one can explain why there were so many cubes found in one place. It feels incredibly unusual to have found so many. I will get them appraised and find out more about them as to how much they are worth. I could be sitting on an absolute pool of cash, or they could be worth nothing. But I won't make any decision on what to do with them until I found out more about what they actually are." And the next one is from abc.net.au. Let me see if there's by George Burgess, and this is rare 200-year-old clay pipe depicting thylacine, dubbed the Holy Grail of Tasmanian archaeology. And the thylacine, of course, is the Tasmanian tiger, which may or may not be extinct. A 200-year-old clay pipe sold as an unwanted item by a bottle collector at auction has been described as the Holy Grail, quotation marks, of Tasmanian archaeology. The intact pipe has a motif of a Tasmanian tiger, and is thought to be one of the earliest European depictions of the extinct creature. Principal archaeologist with Southern Archaeology, Darren Watton, has said that it is a very exciting find. "It's hard to contain myself as to how exciting it is," he told Helen Shield on ABC Radio Hobart. "In terms of Tasmanian archaeology, it's the Holy Grail." Clay pipes were used before cigarettes and were mass-produced through the molds and designed to be used and discarded. The pipes were generally made in the United Kingdom or other parts of Europe and imported to the colonies. But this pipe was handcrafted locally using river clay. "It's got some really special attributes, which we don't usually see," he said. "It indicates it was a local person making it, perhaps for themselves. It could have also been a convict. The pipe was found in a bottle dump near Lounston, with the bottles dating to around 1830, making the pipe at least 190 years old. Mr. Wanton was alerted to the pipe a few months ago after an avid collector of Tasmanian tiger paraphernalia bought the pipe at auction. He has since gotten second opinions on it. There is quite a buzz in the archaeology and academic community about this particular pipe, he said. It conjures up all these sorts of ideas about when it was made and who made it. The pipe's finder was an amateur bottle digger who found it sandwiched between two larger bottles at the base of a pit on private property near Lounston in 2016. The collector then sold the pipe as an unwanted item. Stephen Slightholm from the International Thylacine Specimen Database snapped up the pipe at auction. The rendering of the thylacine, with its distinctive striped coat on the bowl of the pipe, does not appear to relate to any 19th century image that could have been used to assist in the modeling, Dr. Slightholm said. So the somewhat naive artwork appears to be original. Consequently, the image is one of the earliest depictions of a thylacine we have on record. Adding to the mystery, the pipe also has a motif of a kookaburra on it. The bird was not introduced into Tasmania until 1902, suggesting the maker spent some time on the mainland before moving to Tasmania. Another theory is that the bird is actually a Tasmanian kingfisher, or a generic bird. The find will be published in an archaeological journal. And our last one is mysterious metal skull discovered on Kittery Beach, and this is from Seacoast Online. This is written by Hadley Barndollar, and here we go. This is in Maine. Kittery, Maine, lying inconspicuously in the sand at Sea Point Beach Tuesday, is what appeared to be a human skull, weathered, brown, and rusted. But the Kittery Police Department has assured it's definitely not a real human skull, but rather it's made of metal. Police Sergeant Josh Stewart on Wednesday said no one had reported the skull to the police, but officers went to check it out after a reporter inquired about it. It's a metal skull. You can see the machine marks on it, Stewart said. Nothing too extraordinary. The skull was discovered by Kittery resident Serena Galshaw, who on Tuesday went for a solo bike ride at sunset and stepped onto Sandpoint Beach to stretch for a few minutes. She said she knows the beach is closed to the public because of the coronavirus emergency. Something caught my eye in the sand, Galshaw said. I was sort of startled to realize it was a skull. I studied it, got closer, and it appeared to be rusty. So then I was like, okay, this must be cast out of metal. For a few seconds, Galshaw said she was definitely concerned. While investigating, Galshaw said that despite looking so realistic, she noted the skull was quite heavy. It was resting up in the soft sand by the grass, she said. So it didn't seem plausible that it was washed up there during a storm, considering its significant weight. Galshaw wonders if the skull was perhaps placed there as a political statement, or to remind rogue beachgoers of the current world events. Perhaps this is a Maine version of the Florida man dressed up as the Grim Reaper, protesting that the beaches are reopening, she said. I mean, I don't know if this was an artist who did this, or this is from a science classroom, or some sort of weird Halloween patio decoration. Even if it wasn't meant to be a statement, it can be, Galshaw said, noting that she's worried that the economy and public spaces may be reopening too quickly. Stewart said the police department said it's putting the skull in short-term found property collection to see if anyone calls to claim it. And so there you go, the local headlines for the last episode of the season. So there we go, that is it. And we're going to finish this episode up with an interview from Jason Cowan. And most of you, at least with this show, may not recognize the name, but you're going to recognize the voice and be able to put a face with it. Because if you've watched Hellier, especially season 2, Jason is the guy that they do the UFO abduction experiment to. But it just so happens he also knew George Lutz later in life, and he kind of carries on the tale now and does talks and all that. So I wanted to get him on the show and talk about some stuff we did. So I'm going to throw the interview in here, and I will come back, of course, when it's done, and we'll finish up episode 10 of season 3. So enjoy this, because this is a good one. And I'll be back. My first question is always kind of the same for all these, and because it's always an interesting one to see where everyone comes from. But what sparked your interest in the paranormal just overall?
Well, for me, I got into the paranormal, quite frankly, from Scooby-Doo as a kid. I was super into. I mean, I was obsessed with that show. In fact, I used to tell my mom, when I grow up, I want to be like Scooby and Shaggy. And then that really actually happened. I kind of I went from Scooby-Doo to Ghostbusters, and then Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and then it just grew and grew and grew from there. So So I became friends with Greg Newkirk, who does the Traveling Museum of the Occult and Paranormal, and he and I started together actually. And 1998, Greg asked me to help them pull a prank to scare a friend of theirs in a cemetery. So I went into the cemetery ahead of him, set up all this Blair Witch stuff. And we had such a good time messing with this kids. We're like, why don't we check out an actual real haunted place? And there's a small mining town in the middle of nowhere. It's abandoned. There's really nothing left but some foundations. Big one, obviously plagues are huge right now. So plague hit there, wiped out most of the town. The mining industry died, and so the cemetery is like, the epitome of hauntedness, and the legend was always there when we were growing up. And we went, and so stuff actually happened, and that kind of just, set us down a trail of paranormal intrigue that has never ended.
I know. I was chuckling because when you're in Pennsylvania, right?
Yeah.
So when you were like, "Oh, it's an abandoned mining town," I'm like, "Well, yeah, it's Pennsylvania. How many abandoned mines and old towns are there in Pennsylvania?"
So many.
So many of them, like every other town, right? But no, that's fun. What it's just like. No, that made me think of. So my grandfather, they lived across the street from the cemetery here in town, and he always told the story of them doing the exact same thing of just scaring some dude in the cemetery and making him run all the way back to the farmhouse and down the long driveway and scaring him. It was, but yeah. So let's get into it. So I didn't know this, like I said, I didn't know this till a few weeks ago. Like I always just knew you as you're the 3D printing guy for the museum, and if anyone knows you from anything, it would be probably Hellier 2 because you are the UFO hypnosis guinea pig.
Yeah.
Of a better term.
Guinea pig. Sacrificial lamb is more like
Sacrificial lamb is a good one, yeah. But so how did that all occur then? How did that relationship with George Lutz begin?
Okay, so in 2000, it was like 2003, this production, so Ghost Hunters Inc., Greg and me and a bunch of our friends, we had been going strong from 98 on, and we had kind of built like a local following, and we had a website that was we were posting crazy stuff all the time, all our ghost hunting adventures, and a production company out of Seattle contacted us, New Guild Pictures, and they wanted to do a documentary about our ghost hunting team. So they came out and they wanted us to go to, places that we had never really done before that would be like first time explorations for us. And we chose this place that I had heard of, I originally had heard it on the bus riding to school. It's a church that's only used, twice a year. And, supposedly it was very haunted. People would see ghostly figures walking through the graveyard. People would see lights going in the windows, even though there's no electricity. And but the story that really got me about the place was supposedly on one of the bi-yearly services, the minister went out to his car. Only person at the place went out to his car to get something, came back, and every Bible in the place while he was gone was turned to the same creepy passage in Revelation, something about the end of the world. And that story stuck with me. Like I thought it was thinking. So it's like, why don't we go there for the documentary? And we all agreed and we went. And within seconds of getting inside the place, stuff started happening. You could hear it stomping and running around upstairs. You could hear it walking up and down the stairs. I mean, we had never seen anything like this. I mean, this was like, not only was this happening, because I mean, you know how ghost hunting is, like you hear a noise, you're never sure, 100% sure what you've heard. But this was, 6 of us, including a cameraman, hearing this, and it was stomping and reacting, and all of a sudden we looked, and it has an octagonal pulpit, which is kind of in the center of the room, and this green mist started to form on the pulpit, and we all could see it, and it started coming down, and all of a sudden the camera started going crazy. It kept turning itself off, the camera was trying to focus on the mist, but it couldn't, like, for some reason it wouldn't focus, even though he was manually trying to adjust it. It just wasn't letting it happen. And then all of a sudden the cameraman said he felt like he was being choked. It was all videoed. It's in the movie, and we had to get him out of the place. And as soon as we got him out, everything was fine. But he, it was just, and then we were obsessed with the place. So we went back another time, and we'd never. I mean, this thing was reacting on command, and like a haunting that reacting that way was just something we'd never experienced before. It was like performing, for lack of a better term. And at that point, I said, Jesus could kick your ass. I actually said that. And this book from the top of the building flew down and slammed on the floor directly in front of us. I mean, it flew. There was nobody up there. Then there shouldn't have happened. And like being the brave guys we were, as soon as it hit, we hauled ass out of there. And so we were supposed to promote the movie at a horror convention, and in Reisterstown, Maryland, called Horror Finds. And so back then, we were using map. It was before the GPS, so we were using MapQuest to plan our route. And Bill, one of the other guys in the group, and I stopped on the way back from. We had gone to a local diner to plan our route. And he's like, "You want to stop at the church on the way back in?" And of course, I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Let's go without flashlights." And I'm like, "Absolutely not without flashlights." So I brought mine, but he wouldn't, and he made me busted on me the whole time. And we opened the church door, and all of a sudden we could hear it stomping, and like was it within seconds of opening the door. And inside the door to the right is a wall that's kind of at this point just a graffiti wall where people sign like an autograph, like "We've been here" kind of thing. And so he wanted me to shine my flashlight on the wall to, look at some of the names, see who else had been there, kind of thing. And as I stepped inside the door to do that, we heard something come down the stairs, and all of a sudden something broadsided me. Like it felt like I was being like tackled. And I'm 5'5". I hit the wall at like 6 foot roughly, right at, like Bill's like 6 foot. So it was like right at his eye level. I hit the wall. I blacked out at that point. Like I went into like a state of shock. Bill had to get me out of there. So I was like, that's it. No more. I'm not doing this stuff anymore. I want nothing to do with this anymore. I was done with the paranormal. But at that point I also committed to, going to, promote the movie. So we went to the convention. I was like afraid of everything at that point. And we happened to be walking by a booth where George Lutz of the Amityville Horror was sitting. And, I had heard of the movie, I'd heard of the book. I didn't really know a lot about it. I definitely didn't know his name. And so I was like looking at some of the stuff he had on the table, memorabilia from the house, that kind of thing. And, books, and I said, "So you're George Lutz, huh?" And he said, "Yeah." And he shook my hand. He said, "Who are you?" And I told him, I said, "Yeah, we're here promoting our ghost hunting movie." He's like, "Oh, really? You do that?" I'm like, "Well, I did, but I don't now because I was violently tossed into a wall because it's all fun and games till somebody throws the fat kid." And that day it threw the fat kid. And so he kind of chuckled, and he's like, and I was like, "I'm done. I don't want anything to do with this anymore." He's like, "So that's it, huh? You're just going to wrap it up? You're going to let that, beat you?" And I was like, "Did you hear the part where I was thrown into a wall?" So yeah, I am done. And he was like, "What?" So he's like, "You seem to have this gift for humor. You could use that, to combat this stuff, and you could do a lot of good within the paranormal world." And I was like, was mildly intrigued, like why he was saying, like, well, where am I supposed to learn to do that? And he's like, I'll teach you. And from that point, he took me under his wing. I went to Penn State with him, like on to a horror convention. I traveled all around Virginia. They were doing a documentary that eventually they intended to release. And so we did cases all over North Carolina, South Carolina, West Virginia. And, we just we traveled all these crazy places dealing with Amityville related cases.
I guess I didn't know. Like, I didn't realize that Lutz did all that. Like, he did investigations and.
He didn't until the last couple of years of his life.
Yeah.
He had avoided it. And it's not something that's super popular. Not a ton of people know that he was doing it. He just, he was more interested in helping people. It wasn't so much that he was like just checking out places for the sake of checking them out. But if we went someplace, there was a reason for it.
Gotcha. It's interesting. I did not know that. So because of him, did you get to meet like anyone else? Were you able to meet the whole family, the Warrens, anybody else associated?
I had met the Warrens several times.
Really?
It's hilarious. Right up until, she stopped touring. Whenever I would see Lorraine, she always called me Josh. And like, I corrected her a million times. I'm like, it's Jason, but.
Yeah, it begins with J. It's close.
Yeah, it was close. I mean, it was close, but she was a very sweet man. I never met Ed. I met only her. I met her originally at Penn State at Unicon through George. And then I'm pretty good friends with Christopher Quarantino, aka Lutz. And I know of the daughters, but I've never had much interaction with them.
Yeah, that's weird. Like, yeah, I hear about like because Chris had his own documentary. You hear about Chris all the time, but you never really hear about like anything from Missy or like.
She doesn't. They're all the three daughters, as far as I know, they are still all involved in the clergy, so they don't dabble stuff.
Gotcha. I see.
They all live in I don't know if Missy lives in Las Vegas, but Gabby and Noelle both do. I'm pretty sure live in either Arizona or Las Vegas still.
Okay. The thing that like always, the whole Amityville topic, as it seems to be a bit of like a quagmire. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of decisive books and documentaries. It's like you can't read one book or watch one documentary that is kind of gray. You know what I mean? It's always like
there's a lot of hands in the
there's a lot of hands in
there's
that
a lot of
soup.
hands in the Amityville soup for sure.
So, coming from you, what do you think is the best kind of explanation for it all? Where do you come to it at?
Well,
as
somebody
who's
who's
kind
of
exaggerated, do you think some of it was not? Just what's Jason's take on the whole thing?
I think that the movies and the book were made with some creative licensing. I think some of the most terrifying stuff that happened to the family, they never talked about at all. No, with not even the books. It was just too traumatizing. I think what actually happened to that family was 10 times worse than anything they ever talked about. Because, like, whatever happened that last night, George would never talk about publicly, like in great detail, especially whatever happened to the boys. And Christopher has yet to tell his side. And in fact, George would say, it's not my place to tell their section of the story. That's theirs. They'll do it one day if they so choose.
Yeah, he did.
So, George was very adamant that, there was a lot of other stuff going on, and it followed them. Like, and that's the other thing, people think that, the family fled in the middle of the night. They left the next day. They, that last night was it for them, but they never intended to leave the house for good. They wanted to get it fixed and then move back in. And unfortunately it just, it didn't work out that way. And, weird stuff. Like, once you open the Amityville door and you go down it, and from personal experiences, once you open that door, it recognizes you, it remembers you, and it does not let you stray from it. I've tried to get out of it a million times. My wife, when I moved in here, when we moved into this house and we got together, did not believe in paranormal activity. She does now. Anytime I tour a college and talking about Amityville stuff, it happens. Something happens. The first thing that happened to her, we have a big like cast iron leaf that hangs on the wall. It's decorative, very heavy, and never moves. I had done a lecture at a college about Amityville, got home that night, and it flew 12 feet across the room in front of her. And anytime I talk about it, and probably tonight, because I'm doing this interview, I will have something happen.
Did you tell her? Did you tell her that you're doing this interview?
I did not mention it was Amityville 4. I honestly didn't tell her because of that.
Well, you have to let me know. You'll have to let me know if
yeah, I
if
will.
anything if anything goes down. You'll
every time. Well, one time I did a talk about Amityville at a Parafest. It was called Parafest. It was in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, at a casino event that they did, and I was in the hotel after the event. You know, everybody, you know, the paranormal events people always party hardy. I had, you know, gone back early because I was exhausted, and I was laying in bed, and the bathroom started screaming, like just the screaming was coming out of the bathroom, and I was like, holy shit. I'm like, you just never know what's going to happen with it. It doesn't like me justifying the family. Anytime I speak highly of the family or, you know, that kind of thing, it tends a tendency to push back.
Yeah. Because it's always kind of, you know, people always go, well, it's not haunted because no one's ever experienced anything since they left, which I don't know if that's, I've heard, you know, you hear it once again, it's all a bunch of quagmirery hearsay stuff about like, do you know of anything like, I don't know, real or anything tangible that has happened to anybody in the house since they've left? Or do you think it's more of like, it's not the house? Maybe
I think it started at the house, and I think the property is still haunted. I went there.
I was going to ask the next question. Have you been there?
I have. I went in the middle of the night, in like a Wednesday, because it was like, if any time cops are not going to be here to stop you, it's going to be the middle of the week at like late. So we went. That's when we went, and I got, because I kind of wanted to, because I've heard the story, you know, George's stories thousands of times. I mean, I heard him talk so many times. And so I wanted to kind of see everything. And I was like fascinated that, number one, the houses are so close together. You know, they make it seem like in the movies that they're far, far apart. They are next door. There's no reason that the neighbors somebody on that street should have heard gunshots, especially that many gunshots.
Especially at night, you know, like, because, I looked at Street View on it, and you're right. Like, it's really hard to, because, you know, like the address has been changed and stuff.
Yeah.
So
and the house is altered, and like somebody should have heard something.
Oh, agreed. Yeah. Especially at night with nothing else going on, you know?
And so like, that was one of the things I was doing there. And I had gotten down between the house to the left and, you know, the Amityville house, and I was walking down there. Nobody was living there when I was there. It was in between owners at the time. Okay. So I was like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this now. Right. And so I was walking down through there, and I forgot that the river is directly behind it. And somebody was in a boat down there and shined a bright light on me. So I like panicked because I was like, what is that? But it really was just a guy in a boat after like I calmed down, like, because I just wasn't expecting. But I was just like, but then when I got to the other side of the house, there was a whispering that I to this day, I don't know where it was coming from. I didn't see anybody, you know, in the bushes. I was looking, and I can't prove that it wasn't somebody, but I did hear a whisper.
Could you make it out, or was it just kind of like, you know,
it was like you just like in unintelligible, like a noise. Yeah. And then actually another group of people pulled up and were like taking pictures of the house. And then I left, and I was like, it's not worth getting in trouble here.
Right. I don't want to get arrested, but I don't want to get arrested out of state either.
No, definitely not.
For some light trespassing. So this is a question that's always been on my mind ever since Chris's documentary. Do you know, or did you think that was George into the occult like ever, or is that just like a bit, you know? What do you think, or is that a touchy subject?
It's an uncomfortable subject for me, but I'll talk about it anyway. do I think he dabbled in some stuff? Yes, I do.
I think a lot of people in the 70s did.
And he was, he called it transcendental meditation, but there was more to it, and I think that between obviously not between you and I, this is an interview and this is going out, so
I can cut it out. But I'm recording tonight, so if you want to cut it out, you gotta let me know in like the next 4 hours.
No, I mean, I think that I think that he did dabble. I think that things got a little too intense for them, and I mean, the guy slept with a rosary in his clenched in his hands, and that was with no cameras and not for show, not when he would think anybody would see. That's not something like, we had keys to his hotel room, so he would go in and take a nap, and he would never know if we were even going to come in the room to get like equipment or whatever. So like for him to be sleeping that way, he would put blessing stuff around the outside of the bed. So I mean, he was protecting himself,
right,
for a reason. And like that far out, there's something after you if you believe that. Like I saw the guy's face change. I saw the guy start glowing, and so like that's not just an ordinary garden variety thing. I mean, people don't just normally glow. It freaked me out so bad. In fact, that was the last time I saw him in person. I continued to talk to him after that, but I was so freaked out by the glowing that we were in North Carolina. He had called me to talk to me about my dealings with the paranormal and my fear, and we were sitting in a hotel room, and he asked Timmy Yancey and I to come in the room, and he said, I wanted to teach you these techniques, and like he started to do, I guess, a sort of meditation, and I'm sitting there and watching, and he started glowing, and like I'm looking at Tim, and Tim's looking at me like, yes, I see what you're seeing, and I'm like freaking out. I raised my hand really sheepishly, and I'm like, I don't want to interrupt, but you're glowing right now? And he's like, oh, you can see that right now? And I was like, yeah, and that's not normal. That's not. So he would like, and he's like, that's an aura. You can control them. You can do this with them. You can do that with them. But I was so freaked out that I drove 10 hours at 8 o'clock at night through the night to get back home to Pennsylvania, because I was just so completely I've never seen anything like that before.
Wow. I was not expecting all of that. Actually, I always figured that like maybe he dabbled like a lot of people did in the 70s, and I don't think he was some dark black magician, but
no, I don't think so
there was just a lot. I mean, it was the 70s. You had all this stuff coming back, yoga and chaos magic and all the, was kind of the thing. So I always wanted to get someone else's like perspective on that question other than.
I do think that I think he more than dabbled at one point. I think that, he was practicing some stuff and it got out of hand.
Interesting. Where am I at here? Because actually we've actually answered a couple without asking them. So now I got to figure out which one.
My bad.
No, that's cool. That's cool. So out of all this, like with your relationship, your friendship with George, what do you think was the best thing that came from it? Like,
he was, so my father and I were never close. My dad was a very emotionally abusive guy. It just, we're not friends. And George stepped in as a surrogate dad at a time when I was, in some pretty dark places. Mm-hmm. And so he was funny, and that's the thing that never gets captured in any of the movies. Like, they never capture how funny he was. I mean, he was just constantly pulling pranks. I mean, he convinced an entire audience of people at a book signing that I was the original actor from the Addams Family movie, and I played Pugsley Addams. So, like, all these people were, asking for my autograph, and I'm like completely confused as to why, because I'd never been on TV or anything at that point. And so, like, I asked this kid, I'm like, who do you think that I am? And he's like, aren't you Pugsley Addams from the Addams Family? I was like, no, who told you that? He's like, oh, George Lutz told me that. So, like, the guy was like manipulating. One other time,
how many autographs did you sign?
Like 10 or 12. It was,
before you were like, wait a minute.
Yeah, and I thought maybe at first it was like, oh, they know I'm with George, so they're just, grasping at some sort of frame straw. But after a while, I was like, this just isn't right. It's like, this is not normal. And I know at one point, George had snuck into my hotel room. I told them I was leaving to go get food and I would be back. And they used my extra key to get into my room, and they duct tape a speaker underneath the cabinet in the shower in the bathroom, and they were whispering "get out" while I was showering, and I kept hearing the voice. And the only reason I knew that it was them was because they forgot to hit the button quick enough, and I went bloop, and I was like, "Are you kidding me?" And I looked under the sink, and I'm like, and here's the haunting I'm having. So like he messed with me, that kind of thing, all the time.
Oh, that's great. So do you still give talks? Probably not like right at this moment due to some incidents that have happened.
Yeah.
But like, do you still do that from time to time?
Yeah, absolutely. Whenever Halloween's obviously the biggest season for it.
Right.
I'm going to be doing phenomenology, whenever I don't seek it out because my wife and I had twin sons last year, and we have a 4-year-old, and like I said, anytime I talk about Amityville, it shows up. So due to their births, and my wife had a stroke, she has a heart condition, as she had a stroke from the stress of the birth of the twins, and so we spent a year rehabbing. So it's just irresponsible on my part to do it a ton. Gotcha. I do it, whenever I get the itch, or if somebody requests it, or if it's for a good cause. I'll do it, but I don't actively seek it out. And then obviously you've seen what happened whenever I hang out with Greg Newkirk. So so anytime haunting stuff, my wife just would prefer I stay away from it if at all possible.
Gotcha. Okay, well I think that about one more thing. I just want to give you a chance. Is there anything you want to plug, or I know, don't you run a blog now and stuff, don't you?
I do, yeah. It's kind of a dad, pop culture blog. It's called Dadpocalypse now. You can find it at www.dadpocalypse.com. And, it's just kind of sometimes some haunting stuff pops up, but, it's, superhero stuff and nerd stuff. It's funny. Mm-hmm. It's with my kids, being crazy and all kinds of stuff like that. So check it out. It's a lot of fun. I intend to do a little more haunted stuff with it. I've got, a million resources for that.
Right. I'll make sure to put that in the show notes so people can
I appreciate that.
Yep. Because it was when I was trying to find it, I was like, I wonder if he's on Twitter. So I just searched your name. And I was like, I think this is him, but all it is an icon. So I had to go through your media to be like, oh, there he is. Okay. Make sure it was the right guy. But no.
Yeah, I just really started. I have had Twitter for forever, but I only ever used it to read, other tweets. I never really tweeted a lot myself.
Lurking around.
Yeah, creeping.
All right, that is a wrap on this episode, on this season. 3 seasons in the bag already. 30 episodes. I don't know how many hours of content done, and many, many more hours of content to come. And actually, before I get too far into the end of the show here, I do want to talk about a couple of things that happened tonight. So Jason was talking about how when he has a tendency to talk about this subject, things happen to both parties, and some things did happen tonight. So the first one maybe just might be me, but when recording that first segment about the haunting, I was getting extremely pissed off about it and really, really angry. Not frustration, which is what I normally feel when things aren't going well, but pure anger, to the point where it's I need to stop doing this for the night and pick it up tomorrow. But I soldiered on, and I got through it, and the second part was the most relaxed I'd ever been doing the show, which was, I thought, kind of weird, just a weird vibe, but once again, might just be me. The other thing that happened, I don't remember exactly when it happened, but it was during recording that first segment. I took a little break. I stopped it. I got some water or something, and I just had my headphones on. And so the mic is just, I wasn't recording, just had my headphones on. So the mic was picking up the ambient noise around the house. And I heard voices for 5 seconds, as if someone had turned the TV on and it was just loud enough where I could hear it but not make out what was being said. And no one else is up. There are no TVs on. My phone is in airplane mode and do not disturb mode, so it didn't make any interference. There were no cars going by with the radios on at the moment, so it wasn't that. It was just, I don't have no reason where they came, but I heard them in the headphones. I don't even know if I would have heard them had I not had headphones on. So that was a little freaky. That was a little unexpected, but some stuff did happen. So I just wanted to say that real quick. And it was, so this was an interesting night to say the least. But yeah, a few things. So season 4 is coming up. I'm going to take my obligatory week extra break, even though I kind of took one earlier. Whatever. I'll do what I want. And we'll come back with season 4. So some things about season 4. I am going to start Patreon in season 4. My plan is to launch on July 1st. That way I can do it at the beginning of the month, and I have a nice month-long rotation to keep track of rewards and know what I need to send out monthly. I'll get into all of this the first episode of season 4. I will let everyone know what you will get, what the tiers will be, what the pledges are, all that great stuff. But that is coming, season 4, July 1st, Patreon for Small Town Secrets. Did anyone hear the cat just go? Arr. He's being very ornery. He wants to play laser pointer, and he won't leave me alone now. So might have to get out of here and play laser pointer with the cat for a little bit before I go back to bed. But besides the cat, that is Patreon. That is coming. Once again, if you have a small town secret that you would like to share, a Hondi in the story, a true crime thing, cryptid, UFO, any of that stuff, so many ways to get it to me. Go to stscast.com. Scroll down the bottom of the page. There is an email form that you can fill out with your experience. Yeah, that will get it to me, and we can get it on the show. I can just read it. You can give me a news article. We can set up a Skype interview or whatever, like we did with Jason, and get it on here. You can get at me on social media. Twitter and Facebook are both at STScast. Twitter is where I'm most active. You can also find me on Instagram at stscast.gram. So give me a follow on any of those if you want to get at me with an experience, or you just want to hear updates about the show, or just all the stupid other crap that I post. That is one way to do it. There is a subreddit for the show, which I'm really going to try to get more traction with on season 4, where if you want to just get on there and join that and leave a story so that maybe we can all have a little discussion on it or whatnot, that can also get it on the show. So many ways to do it. So many ways to get at me. Other stuff on the site. There is show notes for this episode and every episode. There are pictures for this episode and every episode under the episodes tab. You can also find merch. So you want to buy a shirt, a sticker, a coffee mug, any of that great jazz. Hit the merch tab, and that will take you to the store to do some of that, which will, of course, help out the show. And I want to thank everyone that listens, everyone that engaged with the show in any way that you do it, whether you are buying merch or just tweeting or just telling people about the show. It all helps the show grow. It all makes it all so exciting to continue to do and see what I can do with this as we go on, and I greatly appreciate it. So if you've been listening since episode 1, thank you. If this is your first episode, I hope it's at least your second episode, because this is a 2-parter. You gotta go back and listen to that first part if this is your first episode. But thank you nonetheless. And the best way really to make the show grow, 2 things that you can do. 1, please leave a rating and review, a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. That's kind of the biggest metric one out there right now. Or on your podcatcher of choice. It helps get the show noticed. It helps it float up to the top a little bit. But the other thing that you can do is just tell a friend. If every one of us gets one other person to listen to the show, that automatically doubles the audience. And it's the easiest thing that you really can do to help the show grow. Big semi going by, making a lot of noise. It's weird. It's a small town, 200 people. We don't get a lot of semis coming through at 5:13 in the morning. But that's it. That is this season. Thanks, everyone, once again. I'm going to say this. This is what you had to look forward to for episode 1 of season 4. I don't normally do this, but it's locked in. I'm going to be doing this story. So I have one of the most batshit crazy stories that I've ever done on this show. I am talking doppelganger wives. I am talking samurai swords. I am talking severed alien heads in the freezer. It's a wild story, and that is what is going to be opening up season 4 of Small Town Secrets. So until then, actually, let me pull up calendar real quick, and I'll give everyone the date of when everything should be coming back. So today is the 22nd. Should be coming back on the 12th of June will be when season 4 will start. So until then, remember, everyone, every town has a secret. What is yours?